Last week, we had a demo of the usage of Web Application Factory in Lombix test. Today, we have demos.
I can probably do a small demo.
Like, and topics, do we have topics? I have two. NodaTime demo. So we'll see improvements in SQL and improvements in Fluid. I was so productive last week. Unbelievable. Status. Entered one. We might have merged one PR, I think. We merged this one. I did hints to show technical names in a list of content types and content field definition. So showing content IDs, field IDs, type IDs in some screens where only the display name was displayed. Fluid.Core. What do we have since the 29? This one extract updated versions in documentation because the was the wrong version displayed. Okay. KDocs update, NLog.Web update, Serilog update, Newtonsoft update, new contributor. This one. MimeKit update, tables format. Interesting. Oh, because there are new columns now. Fluid go to
another editor to make my PR, and it messed up with the
oh, I see. Oh, no, yeah, the column are there. I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Okay. Fluid go to 3.0. Oh, yeah, there is because I fixed some bugs. I see. Support for time span. The idea is that now if you have a C# object, a time span object that you pass in a model, there was a bug if it was a time span. So now it's converted to a date time starting from 1970, like a Unix epoch. Then replace last, add replace last and remove last. So new filters, replace last and remove last, which were available in standard Shopify Liquid by a new contributor, Daniel Petrov. Lots of PRs from Daniel Petrov. Fix local settings breaking mid test. So it's just some mid tests were not culture specific. So based on the machine, it will break. Optimize, replace first, replace last, and truncate. So optimizations for these ones. New target at 7. It's a new TFM, which means when you go NuGet, there was a question from Michel about it. So if you go NuGet and you look at the page, it doesn't mean that. So now it targets also net 7. The same way it was already targeting net 6, net 5, net 3, 1, and net standard to 0 and to 1. Okay, so it's just another specific target, and we do specific targets to optimize the dependencies, or when there is specific code. But in this case, it's to optimize dependencies because these ones might require dependencies that these ones don't. So this is why we target specifically in this case. Fix case when tag multi-statement evaluation. There was a bug, which is interesting. So I had no idea that in a switch case, and if I had no idea, I probably lots of people didn't know about that, and it wasn't working. So in a switch case, so case when in Liquid, sorry, you can have multiple values in the when. And so it's like this value or this value. And there are two ways to express it, either with a comma or an or. So it can be love or else, or love, comma, else. And if you have the same value in two when statements, they will both be executed. So it's a lot of things that was not implemented. And now it's done. Tangent commenter updated. Fix the bug with layouts. Might matter to users. The idea being that I will go to the issue. The idea being that the issue. If you have in a view, this is a view. So this is a layout under body. If you have in a view, this is the or view start. If you assign a variable in a view or in the view start, then the layout can access it, and it was not possible before. So the idea is that, for instance, even in ASP.NET, we do that a lot, like assign the title in the view and use the title in the layout. And what it was doing already was, if there is a render body, it's rendering the view before rendering the layout, such that when you render the layout, it has access to all the properties that were defined in the view. And fixed resolution in Windows because there was some code that was checking for the slash specifically and not the backslash. And fixing how time span is handled after supporting the time span. With regards to time zones, now it's respecting the local time zone once transforming a time span to a time. That is all the changes, and the next one will be to update Parlot. So I didn't release this with a new version of Parlot because I think we would also need to update Parlot maybe in other libraries before that use that, and we use in Orchard. And this one is just perf improvements for the parsing from Marco. Improved some parsing logic related, for instance, to space detection, which is quite significant, which is measurable, so that's good. So that's the update for Fluid. Here, NodaTime. I won't go into details because I don't know much about it. Maybe a lot also. xunit.analyzers and MoQ update. Boom! All these updates. Questions, comments? Anything? Chat. Okay. Demo, Mike?
Yeah, sure. Why not?
If you want, I won't force you.
Well, I mean, I don't think you guys are gonna care much about it, but I thought I would just demo it for the heck of it.
We always care. We love demos. A bad demo is better than no demo.
All right. Well, let me give you a demo. Where's my screen? All right, I believe you can see my screen now.
Yes, and Mike, a comment, Mike.
Yes.
Sometimes we don't care about what you're doing because we don't want to do the same thing. But it's still interesting to see what people do with it. So sometimes, we ask, there are people coming just to show us what they did, not so we can reuse it or whatever. So it's always interesting to see.
And that's the reason why I decided I want to do this demo. feedback is always great as well from the team, whether it is going to be merged or not. I mean, I'm not expecting this to be merged. I'm just going to demo it so we can see. And if there's interest, maybe we will. I don't know. So anyway, so I have a need to export data through Excel file and also import data through Excel file. Currently, we can do that using a JSON, but really JSON isn't a business friendly. So from a business perspective, a lot of them like to use Excel. So I have a need to be able to import and export data through Excel file. So I create a module or a feature that allows me to do such a thing. It's not really 100% ready, but it does the job right now. So anyway, so there's a feature I enabled to allow me to do such a thing. And what I did, I also created a content type here called product and product categories just for the sake of this demo. So really these products are just basically I put fields just so we can kind of see how this works. You can even add parts if you want. But in this case, I only added fields just because I put something real quick for the sake of this demo. So I have this, like, for example, this price field right here is required. These fields are not required, but this one is, just so I want to show the validation process as well. So what happens here, there's two properties. One of them allow you to import and one of them allow you to export. So if you want to import only but not export the data, you can. Or if you want to allow both, you can. If you don't want to allow import, you can. So anyway, so there's a setting right here that allow you to import or export. So in this case, I'm saying I want to allow product to be exported, but the product categories, it's not exportable right now. So I just left it alone right now. So there is two menu items under contents, and one of them is called import, and then the other one is export. And import, it tells you here import product because product was marked importable. So I can click on here, and if you look at this screen, everything here is generated based on the definition. So here you can allow, well, you can upload the file, but right under it, it tells you the requirement of what this file needs to look like in order for the system to understand it. So as you can see here, there's the name of the column that it should contain, whether it's required or not. As you can see here, price is required, and there's a description. And these are all derived from the schema or from the product type. You can actually also download it. So if you want to get a template, you can click on download here, and it will allow you to, let me open that file so I can kind of show. Do you see that file that I exported? Can you guys see the Excel file on my screen?
No.
No.
Nope.
Let me stop the share and share the entire screen. I think that's what I did wrong. 1 second, sorry. Where's my entire screen? There. Okay, I think you might see that now.
Yeah, good.
Okay, good. So this is a file that I exported, which is just a template. It gives you the header name, and also if you highlight over it, you'll have some description about what each one really means, whether it's required or not, things like that. So anyway, we don't care about that. This is just a template. But I created also a file on the side which kind of adhere to this, so we can import it. So I just put in some data in here so we can see how that works. So there's 3 items that I'm hoping to import. There's a title, description, there's quantity for one of them, there's category. This category is a content picker field, and I'm putting text. I'm not putting an ID. So that we have to take the text, convert it to ID, and store it. So I'm gonna show you how that works. So here's a file. I believe that's the file, and we're gonna do upload. So I just uploaded it, and what happened here is that they're all collapsed, and the reason why they're collapsed is because there's no error. If one of these fields is erroring, this will become red, and it will export or uncollapse it, make it visible so people can make the correct changes. So in here, I still have the chance to change whatever it is I want to change if I want to, and if not, I can just go ahead and proceed. So if I want to change this to 20, I don't know, I realize, oh, it's a mistake, I can go ahead and change it. And then I can go hit process, and then there's 3 products were successfully imported. So if you go to items, there's your 3 products that were just created. So, you know, if we go back and we actually delete those, I'm just going to re-import the file with errors just so you can kind of see. So import the file again, same file. No, that's the wrong file. That's the template. So we're gonna do this, and we're gonna leave this blank, and maybe the last one blank, just for kicks and giggles. And we're gonna hit process. That's not gonna let me do it. Anyway, there's server-side validation. That's what I was trying to achieve. Let's see if I can do this real quick. And I believe this one needs to have value. Okay, there you go. So I just triggered, kind of forced my server-side validation. So I allowed the post request, and in this case, what happened, you'll see that this one is visible because it contains errors, and the rest are still fine because there's no errors there. And so this one tells you you have to correct the issue, which is if the price is required. So I just did that just to show the server-side validation. And again, if I import it, boom, and it's all imported. Similarly, I can export. So you can export here, and here you can select which type you want to export. And because product is the only exportable type, it's here. So I can say, hey, I want to export product, and hit export. And I should, if everything works as expected, get this file right here. And so with this file, you have, you know, a content ID. I made those 2 columns exportable, and then there is the data that I exported. So again, this is not something for everyone, but from a business, you know, they're not going to understand JSON or how to generate a JSON file to import data. And so this makes that process much easier. If they want to import large amount of data or whatever kind of data they want to manipulate using Excel, then they can do it using this feature. So hopefully you guys like what you saw. So yeah, if you have any questions, fire away.
Super useful, I think, for lots of people. And yeah, there is always a time where you need to move data from existing system, or you need to export like you need. CSV is a good choice because it works in Excel also, and it works everywhere. And that's usually what you get as an input also when you get from other systems. I would not have used this flow in the UI personally, but I don't export and import Excel, so I'm just thinking you how I would have liked to see it. I don't think being able to edit before it's imported is very useful. Well, comparatively to the amount of work to be able to handle every cases, it's a lot, I think. Just saying like validating everything and showing all the errors, and then saying, okay, either you fix the entries or I will just ignore these entries. I think that would have been sufficient.
Maybe that could be an option during the import. You know, hey, you can say allow or not allow and things like that. But in my case, I want to adhere to whatever the definition says. So if the definition says it's required, then hey, I'm going to require it. Otherwise,
no. I mean, it's that I agree with that. I don't think that being able to edit in place before it's imported is necessary. I still agree that I could need to validate the data before it's imported, but at least when you get the CSV, you just output the list of errors, and not the editor for each item. And this way they can say, they can either update their Excel file and fix the values in the Excel file or in the import, or they could say, no, go on still with it, or just ignore the feed, the items with issues. The fact that you let people edit and change and fix, I think it's too much in terms of support.
Well, it is too much, you're right. And I think it's an issue because obviously it's a giant data.
Also, yeah,
but
the UI,
yeah, but I mean, at the same time, how you're gonna assure that the user, hey, you imported 100 rows, but here you only see in 10 because the 10 have errors, right? So
well, you can list one line per item with a and then show like green checkbox, or just to show the data that is not just what I'm saying is the editor itself, I think is too much. Showing the data, displaying everything is fine, but the editor is a lot of work. Oh yeah.
Yeah, I personally don't know how to get around it, but I mean, it's an issue. Yes, I get it. I mean, I am facing it because, if you're importing a lot of data, there's a lot of data being rendered on the screen, and that makes obviously the browser very slow and laggy. And I get that, but
so maybe you need a custom UI that is paged. So when you submit the CSV is stored in a way on the server, in a temporary table or in a custom table that you have, that is like data to be processed. And then you can, for this import, you can then display all the data, page data, and then just say, okay, process that. And then when you click process, there is a background task or even the same transaction that processes all the data afterward. So there is like 2 steps, first upload and then process. Maybe.
Well, that's what I have today, but I think what you're saying to also paging it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have pagination right now, but I mean, essentially there is an import process that actually takes the data, converts it to content types, and then I basically render the content type in an editor mode. So whatever the editor mode is, that's what you're gonna get. But instead of one item, you're doing it for many items. Maybe it could be very helpful to say, hey, ignore the content items that have no errors, and just keep those in the memory. So whenever you do the post, you still grab the valid ones from the memory and create them. Because at the minute you import the file, and you render on the screen, at that point, everything in memory, nothing really was.
Weird.
Yeah. Well, what's weird?
That's why I'm mentioning. We say memory. I would have said store in the database, but in a different table, such that you have some state that people can update and then say, okay, go on with that thing. So the import is something in the database. It's not yet imported, but it's like in a state that you can manipulate the import data and go back to the server and do background imports. So when you post the CSV, this thing is stored in the database in whatever format you want. And then when you say, okay, everything is good, perfect, do the actual conversion now from the import state into the content items. 2 phases with a different table. So
if I may interrupt, this import could be same as SQL Server import. When a preview of import was run and we have a message that these rows are valid.
Exactly what I'm saying. Yeah. So if you haven't seen that, Mike, check how SQL Server provides imports, even of CSVs and stuff. So because it shows an intermediate result, like telling you, oh, this thing doesn't work or will work, and with all the rows, and then you can say, you can act on that and then go on. It's 2 steps. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're saying just put the like if you have the content item object, let's say, store that in a table, right? Maybe a different document collection, store that there, and then have another page that lists everything that is not processed yet to the screen, and then let the user go through it and say, okay, you can go ahead and proceed with those. Let me fix those errors and move on.
People can check each item or not, evict, say remove. It's like a temporary paper. It's like an Excel sheet, like, but on the UI, and then you can say, okay, evict, remove, done, and okay, go on. And when it's stored, it doesn't even have to be content items or document table. It can be a list of JSON documents with all the properties. Like you convert the CSV into JSON. It can be as many JSON documents or one big JSON document. It will be better to be as many JSON documents because you don't know what the CSV fields will be. So the table has to be generic. So it's just a list of JSON documents, aka like maybe SQL documents or whatever. And and this way you can display all of them. That would be nice. And I have a different comment about import-export. Whenever I see that, I want to be able to change the shape of the columns and the data and maybe add columns. Meaning, like when I export data, I like to be able to provide a script that lets me define what are the new columns or the new fields and what are the values of these fields. Because you might not want to map field per field, but you might have to transform the data. Like if the output system needs like 2 columns, two CSV fields based on one of your fields, right? So that would be great to be able to provide a script that will actually get the content item as input and provide an array or a dictionary of values as an output that will be converted to CSV.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like defining fluid properties or something like that.
It will be JavaScript. Yeah.
Yeah.
In this case.
Okay.
And same thing for the import. Such when you get a list of Excel fields, then you can say, oh no, convert like field A and B, create field C, which is the concatenation of A and B. Same thing with JavaScript. So you can transform an input because again, probably the system that push the data to your system, they don't match and they can't be configured, but you can configure it because it's super flexible. So that would be another option.
Yeah, that sounds good.
And that's super easy, right? Because you just for each every row, you provide it as a JSON document with all the fields, and you say, hey, give me the JavaScript, and you just process JavaScript, and it output and it changes the list of fields, and you're like, okay, that's the actual CSV, and done.
Why don't you use a liquid template for this?
No, I don't agree with that, and that's what also Mike suggested. Liquid would be nice to be able to export some text, and then you will build CSV. Fine, that will work. But if you say that the export is always CSV, then it's better to provide a JavaScript just to manipulate the data, to be able to create new properties and values instead of generating a CSV format, which is harder because you have to inject the colon to format the thing, the double quotes, and you are limited to the Fluid thing. So it's just to create one line. You just want the Fluid template to create one line. I think it's useless to use Liquid in this case. It's better to use JavaScript to just manipulate the data because it's just data. It's a list of field values, key values. That's it.
But then you go to a query definition. I mean,
and you can also expose this module with query definitions also. Sure. Like you could say you want to export this query as a source. So what Mike showed is that you can select a content type. I'm like, that's nice, but I think it would be even better to expose queries instead of content types, because a query, you can do a content type, but you can also export anything from the system. So if you have a query that is sent to a JavaScript that is then converted to CSV, you have everything. It's harder in terms of UI because you have to create a query before being able to export. At the same time, it's super flexible because you can create any query, even Lucene, whatever, and then you have data as JSON documents. You can convert them using JavaScript to reorganize the data, like transform the data, and then this data, you save it as CSV and you send it to the user. Done. It's like GraphQL++, but CSV QL++.
I have a question. I don't know if, so I'm running into an issue with this, right? I have a production environment on Azure, running on Azure. Only have a single instance because it's expensive. Anyway, so when I import data locally, and it runs just fine. It takes, I think, about 30 seconds to import, like, I don't know, 500 records or something like that. I don't know. A lot of it is a render time. But then when I run the same thing on Azure, yeah, I get a gateway of 504, which means
Timeout.
something, a service. Yeah, it's a timeout. I can't understand what kind of service, because at that point I'm not even targeting databases. So when you hit import, all you're doing is really reading the Excel file into a data table, and then you're basically calling service or handlers that know how to handle these fields or how to map them. So I'm not sure what could it be.
Yeah, and that's why I'm suggesting to have it in a table and to have a background task, because if you do it as part of the request itself and you have lots of data, you will time out at some point. There will be a limit of data that will time out. So you have to download the file and then process it. Maybe it's good enough to process it in the request, but it's also limited. So maybe just create a background task that will process the import and create it in the database in the custom table. And this is all done in background. So your requests, they are like doing nothing now. You could just have, instead in your view, a JavaScript ping that will send the request every second to ask if the file is ready to be imported. And then when it's ready, then you can redirect to the page that shows the full data, because it will be database. But that's the issue. If you do something in the same request, in the request that's posting the thing, then you will time out, whatever the solution is. And it happens that on Azure, you have maybe 2 or 4 cores max, and it's much slower than your machine. So you are hitting issues. And the network is also a real network, so you're hitting timeouts everywhere. So you need to do background tasks using the background jobs in Orchard or something else. And provide a UI that will just ping the server to ask for the status of the task, and then just show that it's processing with something that spins or saying processing and click to refresh. And then when it's processed, the server will have the state in the database, and then you can say, okay, it's processed, so you can redirect the client to the page that shows them the result.
Would you upload the file and put the file itself in the queue for background?
Yeah, I think so. I think you need to do that, because you have the 2 issues, which is ingesting the data in database to create a temporary import, and then ingesting the import rows into content items. And these 2 things might take a long time each if the file is huge. So these 2 things have to be different background jobs, one to ingest and one to convert CSV to content items. So yeah, you can say when you upload, you save the file, so it's super quick. And then at that point, you create a job that you can request from your client in Ajax. The status.
Yeah. I think the only thing I have to do is actually do validation when the file is imported, because if someone gives you a file that doesn't match the content type that you're importing, you want to error that, because you can't process it. So maybe what you'll do, you'll upload that file into data table and then validate it. And then once it's validated, somehow write that file on the server until it's processed. And then once it's processed, you can delete that file, I guess.
Yeah, in my mind, it will be a file on the file system.
Right.
Then a background job that imports the file into a temporary table. Then when it's done, the client knows, okay, all the data has been imported in a temporary table. At that point, you can delete the file. Then you show the result of the validation, because during the transformation from the file to the temporary table, you can do the validation and have a status on each row of the validation. So you can display it on the UI. Then the user can react and interact with these temporary import items. Then when he says, OK, validate, then you start a new background job that will process all the things to import from temporary table to content items. And when it's done, the background job is done, and also updates the state that you can display to the user. And even to the user, you can display like 10 rows out of 1 million have been imported, and it can every second it can refresh because you have this data somewhere available in the job metadata in the database.
The only thing that I think you have to watch out for is when you put the file, it has to be put on the shared, on like
yeah, on the machine that will execute the job,
yeah.
right? Or in the database, as you said, maybe a table containing the file. Maybe that's what you need to do.
The table contain the.
I don't know, like the same way we do for Lucene, we have. No, for Lucene is when there is a single thing. So you need a shared store. So yeah, so if it's a file, you have no choice. It has to be on one machine that does the import in the background job.
Is there a downside from actually like once you actually take the file, you convert it to data table, it's still in the memory. Now you validate it because you have to validate it. There's no way. I think it won't work without validation. So once you validate it and at least the columns match the expected columns, then you know, hey, at least my process can understand the schema of the file. Instead of writing the file, what is the downside from writing that data table on the database somehow?
Oh, you have to do that. That's part of that's what I said. You save the file first because that's quick and the request will be quick. Then the background job converts the file to the data table and validates everything, but in the background job.
Well, no. I mean, so when you hit import, so you go here, right? And you hit import and then you attach the file, right? What really happens here is that when you hit upload, the request is processed, right? So the data that's coming in from that file is converted in memory to the table, right?
Yeah, I think it's wrong.
You think it's wrong?
Yeah, because you will hit a timeout. Whatever the number of items is, 100, 1,000, 1 million, there is a number after which you will hit a timeout. Unless you say upload here only uploads the file. Okay. Then you return to the user and say, file has been uploaded. Items of this file are currently being imported in a temporary table for validation. Okay, you say that. And at the same time, you start a background job on the server that does that reads every line of the file and puts them in a temporary table. And at the same time, update the status that you can query from the client to say how many items out of how many items have been imported in the temporary table. And when it's done, the background job stops. The client still refreshes and says, oh, 100% is done in a temporary table. So now you can say, you can send the user back to a page that lists all the items from a temporary table with the validation status. And so it's completely now processed in the data table. Now, at that point, when they have manipulated a temporary table, they can say, okay, go on with that, continue. And then you start a new background job that will process every temporary line to convert it into the actual content item. And when again it's done to 100%, the user will be redirected to the list of content items. But this way you can even stop the browser, close the browser, the background job would still work on the server side. And whatever time it takes, even if you stop the server, then when it starts up again, it will continue where it was, because every time it processes a line, it will mark this line as processed and update the status for the next thing to be done. That's what we do for Lucene indexes, for instance.
How would you flag a row if it's been completed or not?
A custom column in this data temporary table. Validate status, validated, imported, whatever, done. whatever status you want. So whenever you read a line from the Excel file, it creates a line in this temporary table. It has an import ID, a GUID. It has a status, which is maybe validating or validated, or error, like invalid, or transformed, like imported. And then based on that, you can show that thing to the user. And then your background job can say, give me the next item that is validated such that it can import it to the content item. And when it's done, it marks the table, the row as imported, such that you can count how many things have been imported out of how many things are to be imported for the user.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So I think when you upload that file, or when you write that file, you might want to load, or first probably set ID for every row, so you can identify each row.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then before you process
that, and also have an import ID GUID, such that you could have multiple imports going at the same time in the same table, because the table will have to support lots of different imports, maybe one at a time, but at least multiple imports. And so I could see an import ID and a column, a JSON column to have the data, and a column with status. Done.
And if anything fail validation, then you just leave it in the queue for someone to determine, hey, process it, fix it, and process it. Or
maybe, or you just do the validation first for every row, and then you let the user see all these invalid stuff, and they can say, oh, remove that, or ignore that, or whatever.
Nope, that's great help. Thanks for the feedback.
But yeah, I'm sure lots of people will need this module or a module like this. And by the way, while you were showing that, I would share the link in the chat. I found an issue with people. Mike Cry, you know Mike Cry, right, Mike? Filed an issue because he need something to import, export data, CSV, Excel, whatever. So there is a discussion already about that.
All right.
An issue. Okay, cool. So Thierry is sharing I remember this SSI stuff, like, yeah, exactly. See, exactly that, like, well, I just opened I will share now. Like it analyzes all the data before importing it, just to tell you, hey, I got the data. Thank you. I looked at all the data and it's missing fields, or it's not valid in terms of data, or blah blah. And do it again, like change your data and send me a new file. And then when it's ready, then we can process. So there is not even a UI to change data. It just says you have an issue in the data. Here is all the issues you have. Fix it and send and do the import again. And when you gave me valid data, then I will start to process everything. But yeah, so it got all the data, it analyzes it, and then when it's ready, it has all the data. You can say go on, and then it says, okay, I will do that one. So that's.
And just one, by the way, Mike, great demo. I think that if we talk about bulk data, probably the inline editor is luxury here, because no one will go in bulk data, edit things.
Yeah. I agree. That's why I say it's maybe too much work to provide the editors. Just listing the issues is fine. Let them edit the Excel file or fix their Excel file.
But if you add support of media field, I'm candidate to test
it. That's interesting. How would you? Oh, and by the way, no, maybe the JavaScript might be a solution here, because maybe the CSV will only contain a URL of an image, right? And then you have to have it could be part of a workflow integration with a workflow also, that the workflow could say like, oh, I have a URL and I need to call an API to update the field itself. Maybe there is a way to do that. I don't know. Or would the CSV contain a base 64, and then you need dynamic stuff to be able to convert data into content items or into fields or into JSON. Or to do a task which is download the image. I don't know, you will do that, download the image. Maybe it's a different step. Maybe you need to be able to just provide a URL and then you upload all the files that match this path into the media folder. So the import will not help here. The import will just update the field name with the path of the file. And in a separate action, you need to upload the actual file to the media system. I would do it this way. Otherwise, it might be too complicated. Okay. Demo. Topics I mentioned, I will talk about SQL and Fluid. So SQL first, because I fixed the issue we talked about. Well, I hope I fixed the issue we talked about a month ago. Gabor pinged me about an issue, almost a year-long issue with perf stuff, remove distinct usage in queries. That's the PR. That's the PR, and the issue is here. So we had Oceania aping, I can't remember his name, mentioning a perf degradation since the PR I had made to add a distinct statement in a query. Distinct you see here. So the idea is, as Mike noticed, that there is this thing that is generated, select distinct document ID, because some indexes can return multiple index rows per document. So if we do a join with this index, we'll see the document number 1, for instance, twice because there are 2 indexes. So if we join with an index that has 2 values for a single document, we'll get 2 document rows in the inner join. And by having that, we'll get, for instance, 2 content items listed, the same content item listed twice or 3 times. And paging is also broken and stuff like that. So that's why we have a distinct here to be sure that when we do a filter on an index, we just get 1 result per document. But this distinct here, even though it works in every case, it makes the request very slow when you have lots of documents, because the distinct was applied on all the, you see it was a distinct on star. So it was also doing a distinct on the JSON values. And maybe the paging was not happening at the correct position. So it was very bad for perf when you have lots of rows. So then we look into, so this behavior, I call it now deduplication. The fact that we need to create a query when we load content items or anything from SQL. The fact that when we do a query, we need to return unique documents, even if there are multiple index values per document. So we tried to find a way to remove the distinct, and one solution was to use a group by. See, we tried many things. So I will just like, oh, if I do this query, can you run it on your system to see how fast it is? And it's like, oh, it's even slower. Okay, don't do that. Okay. So in the end, we were about to use a group by. We got some suggestions also from Benedek and one of his colleagues. That's name Christian, suggestion from Mike. But you see here, I don't see any group by here. So that's nice to provide me with ways with InnerJoin, but it's harder when you have a group by, or because the goal is to remove the distinct, but we still want to duplicate. So these queries here, be careful because they might work for you, but there is no duplication with content item as index returns 1 entry per document. So the issue is not exposed in this query. So that's a wrong suggestion, because I want to see something where there is a group by document ID. And then you see different perf and different ways to create the query, because that's the goal, deduplicate things. So showing an example that doesn't duplicate, create duplicates is a wrong example. So in the end, I went with this kind of query, not this one. Something like that. So select document star and all the things that needs to be ordered by, example, modified PC, inner join another select from all with inner join all indexes from the document and all indexes and all the filters. There is also a group by at this level by ID. There is also ordering and paging at this level. And then there is again ordering in the outer query because the inner join on an order list might not be respected by the outer query here. So we also need again to order by, and that, oh, that's here. So I have a better example here. So select document star, select document ID, group by ID, and anything that needs to be ordered by or filter needs to be also, well, anything that needs to be ordered by needs to be in the select statement. And also
in that you need to select from document though. You can just select from index and do everything without joining to document.
No, I don't agree because
everything you need is just from the index. I don't think you need to return document ID. You can just return, you know, index.document ID instead, and that will save you a join on the inner.
No, you can't because there is this. You need to filter on the content types also sometimes.
Yeah, but that's coming from index.
No, sorry. I will repeat. I will rephrase. You need to filter on the document type. The document type being content item in this case. So if your documents, because when you do,
I mean, if the columns are in question, then maybe you can join. Otherwise,
when you write that with content item index, okay. When you write that, you say, I want a content item, join with the content item index. When you write, I want a content item, there is document type, right, equals content item, always. So we need to start from the document.
Well, I mean, if you're joining with a table, so when you say content item, when you do
no, you can't say that. You can say that because you know that content item is only created for content items, okay? But YesSQL has no idea about that. We say query a type foo, and here is an index bar. The type foo might be one of the types that the bar index is used for, like by name. But I could have people, I could have animals, I can have anything. It just happens that in Orchard, in this query, it's not necessary, but there is no way to say that. What we could do is say, query all the index, fine, and you have a list of IDs. And then we could say, do a query on the document directly. But at this level, we can't. Example this way. So that's why we need to select that. It's the same argument. I
follow you. I understand what you're saying, but I think you can also build the logic in there that say, hey, if I'm going to filter by columns on document, I would include it. Otherwise, I will not include it because it's just an unnecessary join.
Yes, I agree. There could be an extra method that gives hints to the query to say, you don't need that. You don't need to, like, and that would be nice to, you don't need to filter on the type because that's expensive, okay? You don't need to join the document table because this ID is fine. So that could be something like today, I just added deduplicate to say, you don't need to group by because I know you don't need to group by. I know that all my indexes in this query don't provide duplicates. So in Orchard, we could say whenever we do something with content item index, only because I might be other indexes, right? But whenever we say that, we can do .deduplicate. Or or no duplicate, something like that. And this way,
sorry, you can lazy filter. document if needed.
What is that? What do you mean by lazy filter?
I mean that if it's expensive to do in the inner in the sub select, you can filter after the inner join.
No, you need also to filter
if needed.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that what I say? Like,
yeah.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
No document table. Okay, join, something like that. If you know that the query could be optimized when we code the thing, then we could tell YesSQL that it doesn't need to do it. So yeah, so I agree, Mike. But
can't YesSQL determine if those
yes,
if it can determine, then it can make the without me giving you instructions, it should be able to make that decision on its own.
I agree. I mentioned that in my last comment. Today, so no duplicates. So today, what does it do? Today doesn't know. But what I say is that, and today we assume that it's able to deduplicate by itself. So that's why the method is to optimize the thing, not to de-optimize. So what I'm saying, later we can do some breaking changes that will allow us to define this at the index level. So my idea for the deduplication is that when we have an index like content, not content item index, but content field index, for instance. Content field index is very typical because when you have a content field picker, or content media field picker, something like that. Content media field picker can have n media items. Okay. So now if we say, if we do an inner join with this table, because there is an index, content field index, whatever, there is an index for that. So if we do an index with this, an inner join with this index, we might have document 1 and then field 1, field 2, and so on. So this is a typical index that will return multiple fields per document. So we need the group by, so we can't use no duplicates. But what we might be able to do is say multi-map index. Today this one implements map index. Map index can return one or multiple documents. What I think we should do is to have a map index and a map multi-index or multi-map index, something like that. And this way, this one can return multiple documents because we need it. This one can return a single document. So tomorrow, if we have this distinction, then the query will be able to see all the indexes that are part of the query. And if there are only map index, it says there can't be any duplicates, so it won't inject the deduplication. That's the first optimization. But that's a breaking change, because now we need to introduce a new type of index to distinguish that. Then what you say is that let's detect that we don't need the document ID. Same thing. If there is no content type filter, or if it's not necessary, maybe there is a way to say that, yeah, maybe we still need to do that, like something like that. I'm not sure if we can do that automatically for the type. Maybe we could have an attribute on the index to say it's only for content types, like only content item. And if we only have indexes that will only be on specific type, then we can say, well, we don't need to provide the filter because they are all only for this type. So whatever you provide here, or if you say with content item, then doesn't matter. We don't need to join the document. That would be another option, yeah.
You know, I have a suggestion, and I personally don't agree with having all these instructions for index because I think it might be overwhelming. What I think might be a good idea is to add a new extension called with many. So you have with, which does a join, a simple join, and returns a document as is without any distinction or nothing because you're using with. But if you use with many, right? So with many and then index, then we know, hey, there's going to be many of this index. So instead of you even involving a complicated query, what I would suggest you do is you take the subquery, you execute it, you write that result in a temporary table, which basically just a document ID column. That's it. So you'll have a temporary table with a document IDs, and then you could do a join to that. I think having a subquery like that is complicating the syntax, but also having with and with many. So now I know, hey, if I'm putting with, because I know what I'm doing, it's a with. So give me everything with whatever you get. So if I'm using with a specific with an index that returns many, then you're going to get many documents, you know. But if you have with many, at that point, I will take the subquery and I'll get the index, the unique document ID, and then I would join on that. Does that make sense? What I'm saying?
That's something that's almost how it was designed in SQL 1. Well, in SQL 1, and maybe it was designed this way, but in the new SQL 2, which is the one we're using, it's not that anymore. So in SQL 1, we had something even more disconnected, which is there were always two steps. The first step was to query the index, only the index. So you would do query index, that. Well, you will write the same thing, but internally, it will first do query on the index and then document in like ID 1, 2, 3. That was the result from that. And this way, we could even have a store that was not SQL. So that could be Lucene, that could be blob storage and anything for the JSON document. The SQL will just contain the indexes, not the document table. And it will always be one query to get query the index, and then one query based on this result to load the document. So that was how it was working in version 1. In version 2, I wanted to have everything in the database and to be able to do emergence to make it faster. So there is just one communication with the database, not two. One to find index.
And I agree with you. So when you use with, you still use today's logic, right? You don't need to complicate the query. But adding with many, now whenever you use with many, at that point, you take the subquery, you execute it without returning the results. So everything's still on the server side. You just write it in a table, in a temporary table.
So I tried this one using two different queries, like using that to get the IDs and then do a select document from the IDs. And I tried it with a city. Remember I mentioned that last time we had the meeting. And the city is that. What does city mean? I think that means temporary. So city is being like you define a query and you give it a name, and it's a temporary data set. And then you can do another query based on that. It's not a temporary table, so it's supposed to be faster, but yeah, it makes the query much simpler, but it was slower. Because when I did the profile in SQL Server, it was much slower in terms of cost. So I'm like, okay, I need to go with the inner join. I didn't know about the inner join between the subselect and select actually.
What about? I mean, have you tried profiling, writing it to a temporary table?
No, because they said the city was better than temporary tables. So I'm like, if city is not good, temporary tables can be.
Are you sure that's the case?
I didn't try it, but that's
okay.
what
I
advertised.
Think I've done a lot of database work, and I found temporary table to be very efficient in cases like this, and I've used it many times. I could be wrong in this case, but like for example, you could. I never use CTE, but I used with, right? So in a SQL Server, you can use with, and so you can basically define. It's kind of similar, but you're running everything into one query, right? Where you have the whatever logic you have inside the with, that's a one query, and then you can join that to your entire set. and that's that works great. But I've just found that writing it to a temporary table is it's much better. In fact, sometimes like if hey, this temporary table I have a lot of IDs, right? You could probably quickly create an index on that column before you do the join. So you can kind of optimize as needed as well. And you don't have, complicated, because I mean, if the query is so complicated, you're going to have more time for the analyzer to analyze the query, right? And then, and so
is it complicated compared to a with query? Because where is my end result?
Well, I'm not suggesting to use with. I'm suggesting to write that subquery result in a temporary table. So select document ID into temp1 and then join temp1 on document.
I don't see why it would be better, because here you can optimize it, and because I inner join directly on the query. So I don't know. And also offset and everything, you still need to do that.
Yeah, you can do that with the inside the temporary table. So the temporary table will give you the final results, right? And then you can just inner join it this way, because that way it's a much simpler query to analyze by the analyzer.
You should try, or give it to Christian to try, just to have it, like, because this is what I'm generating. So they said they will try it. Okay, and they say it's faster this way than.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just worth trying. I mean, if it's better, if it's good. If it's not better, then oh well. I mean, So.
Yeah, if you can try, if you take this query, for instance, and try to reformat it to something else, and it works, and give me the result. And same thing for Christian, ask him to run it on their system, because they have lots of data. If it's better, I can change it.
No, that's the issue. Is I have to find a database with a lot of data to test with, and I don't think I have one. But I can, when I have time, I can probably generate a lot of data and just test it out.
And then I have to find some kind of query that works with SQLite, MySQL, Postgres, SQL Server. Like this statement, for instance, I don't have it there, but I have an order by now outside also. Something like that. Yeah. So, and I only had to do that because of PostgreSQL, because SQL Server is maintaining the order, but maybe it was just by chance. So I don't know. So I added that for everything. This one. But it's working now. So just to say that now queries should be faster once it's confirmed by Lombic. Queries will be faster. We haven't merged that in Orchard yet. And later on, they can even be even faster when we can have this notion of multi-map index or map index, or maybe an attribute on the index. Maybe that's what we need to do, and it won't be a breaking change at all. We can just add metadata on the index, or implement some custom interfaces to just give hints to the SQL, or use custom methods like this. So that's it. Okay, time, and I have a meeting in 10 minutes. So we'll end with that, and I will talk about what I'm doing in Fluid next week. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
I have discussions. Talk to you on Thursday or next Tuesday.